In 1994, we were excited, filled with mixed emotions and tears. We waved goodbye to family and friends at the airport in Durban, South Africa. Many people were happy for us, especially our family, because they thought that our studies were fully sponsored, but it was not. Our first impressions were not good ones. We landed in Mumbai just when a plague of rats was ending. As we traveled, there were rats as big as cats strewn all over the streets. It was not a pleasant sight. My wife was shocked at the poverty and hopeless conditions that some people were living in. For me, it seemed as if I just went back to Fraser's, my hometown. I felt at home. After a few days, the water seemed normal, the food prepared on the streets were tasty, and everything were just fine for me. I felt at home in India. We enrolled in college and tried to settle down. We did not have a bed to sleep on for more than 4 months. We just slept on a grass mat on a room floor. You know, where there is love, even concrete floors seem soft cushions to you. We did not have many things, but it was our time in India that opened our eyes to the conditions that people live in many parts of the world. After spending a period of just 3 months in India, we were left without a single rupee. We did not have money to even call home. And even if we did call home, they wouldn't have been able to help us financially. It was a very stressful time for both Carol and I. We prayed hard and expected a miracle, but nothing happened. We eventually decided that we needed to borrow money so that I could fly back home to South Africa and work to earn enough to continue our studies in India. But we could not ask anyone. We were there just for a few months. Who was going to trust us with a loan and no guarantee of its repayment? But one of our friends, who was as poor as us, decided to pawn their symbol of marriage so that I could buy a ticket. We were amazed at the offer, but still it was not enough. Another friend who had saved for many years to buy a scooter also pawned his scooter so that we could have enough money for the ticket. I bought the ticket and left India with just my word as surety that I will return with the money to repay. I enrolled Caroline for summer school on the understanding that I will return and settle her account as well. I left India with a heavy heart. Only Carol and I knew the struggle back home. When we left, so many people came to the airport to bid us farewell, but now it was just my sister and her family who were there. It was an intense period of confusion and uncertainty. I did not even have money to travel within South Africa, but Carol and I knew that God will provide for us. I decided to sell books as a colporteur. I ordered the books and picked them up on the understanding that I will pay when I sell them. It was tough selling books in Durban. Time was moving at an accelerated pace. I needed to make enough cash sales and enough of them to pay back all the money I borrowed and to pay for Carol's college fees and to pay for the following year's tuition and living expenses and for a return flight after 1 year. It was tough, to say the least. It was in the thick of winter that I stepped into the taxi in Durban, and when asked to pay the fare, I responded that I would pay at the end of the journey in Johannesburg. The driver didn't know what I knew, and I didn't know what God knew. It was one of those taxis with a window that would not fully close. It was about 3 hours before we arrived at Johannesburg when a fellow passenger swapped seats with the lady who was sitting next to me. I leaned back and tried to sleep but couldn't sleep because the man next to me was restless and agitated. Finally, he woke me up and very apologetically asked me that if he gave me something without me asking for it, would I be offended? Like most normal people, if it is for free, I take it and then decide if I need it. He then took his hand out of his pocket and placed a 100 rand note in my hand. He then expressed a sigh of relief because he told me that a persistent voice was telling him to give me the money. I thanked him and looked to the heavens. At the end of my journey, the taxi stopped. I stepped out and paid the fare with the same money given to me in the taxi. My wife was in India and I had no money to even take a taxi. I stepped into the taxi with the words of the Lord spoken to Moses, "Move forward." And when I moved forward, my Red Sea parted. The entire trip opened a series of miracles that I could not even imagine. Truly, man's extremity is God's opportunity. We may never know what could be done or achieved if we rely only on our tangible resources or wait until everything is in place. Our source of supply and strength is God Himself, God who specializes in the impossible. When I arrived in Johannesburg, I tried selling books to many people. My sister Rebecca in Johannesburg helped me with some travel expenses while I was there. I really appreciated it. Many people bought books, but it was not enough. I decided to pick up a telephone directory and make a few appointments with ministers of different churches, hoping for the opportunity to sell these beautiful books to their members. I called a few and one responded saying that I should come over to his office in Marabastad, just outside Pretoria. When I arrived in Pretoria, it was late in the afternoon. While walking towards the taxi ranks, I noticed a group of men walking behind me. It was frightening. I could see through the tinted windows of the taxis as I walked past, that they were gaining momentum on me. I could not run because I had many books with me. If I could run, I did not know the place, and it would not have been fruitful for me. It was a futile exercise if I tried it. I just continued walking, feeling their shadows on my back. Just when one of them reached out to grab my shoulder, someone else ran towards me, embraced me. It was a black man, and he hugged me and exclaimed that he was so excited that I could make it. He has been waiting for me. After this surprise embrace, he turned to the men who stopped in their tracks and told them that I was his friend coming to visit and they should not bother me any further. I was too surprised for words, but this friend took me to the taxi and arranged the front seat for me and also told the driver where to drop me off. He smiled at me, closed the door and walked away. It all happened so fast that I had forgotten to thank him. I opened the door and looked for him. He was nowhere and no one had seen him leave me. It was then that I learned that angels in black are more important than men in black. When I arrived at the church office, I was met by the pastor whose office was just outside a huge church building with a seating capacity of more than 1,000. His new Mercedes-Benz was parked outside, and I thought that I was surely going to make some good sales among his parishioners. While speaking to him, he received a telephone call. I did not know who was on the other end of the phone, but I heard what he said on this side. After a few minutes, he said to the person on the other side that he did not have time to visit and pray. They should call a pastor nearby. Firstly, I was shocked at his reply. He did not buy a single book from me, and I had to leave. But before I could leave, I asked very politely who had called. He simply said that someone from some hotel in Pretoria. I reached Johannesburg at about 11 o'clock that night and stepped off the taxi in Wheelbarrow, one of the notorious places at that time. But I did not know it was Wheelbarrow. I was new to Johannesburg. I just assumed that it was the last stop when I saw everyone else getting off. I walked many kilometers that night with my box of books. I arrived at my sister's house at about 2 o'clock in the morning. The next morning, I picked up a telephone directory and I called every hotel in and around Pretoria. I asked one simple question: do you need prayer? Many people were in need of prayer, but I was looking for one particular person and I did not know who it was. Those whom I called were not as desperate as the previous day that I sensed in that telephone conversation with that pastor. I did not have money to spare, but used the last few rands that I had to make these calls because I could not accept that somebody needed prayer and a pastor was too busy to pray for them. It did not gel well with my idea of what a pastor should be. Finally, one man answered the phone. He wanted me to pray for his staff and hotel, but there was no serious, desperate need in the tone of his voice. But he invited me to come over and I accepted. Bear in mind that I had limited time in South Africa and my wife was in India. I spent about 3 days and 3 nights in the Farm Inn in Pretoria. I was the guest of the owner, Pedro. He even took me to church that Saturday and he sat with me in a classroom to hear me preach. On Sunday, the next day, I told Pedro that I had to leave, but he requested that I leave after a funeral at his chapel that afternoon. I attended the funeral, and while sitting in the pew that day, Pedro's wife made her way to the front and spoke few words about the deceased. It was then explained to me that Rose, Pedro's wife, called the pastor who did not have time to pray for the man who had died the previous day. During the 3 days that I lived at the hotel, Pedro never asked me anything and I did not disclose anything. I simply accepted his hospitality. Pedro is a good man and his wife, Rose, is a wonderful person. It was God who brought me to Pedro, and even if Pedro did not know it, he was being used by God during that week. On the way to the taxi rank, Pedro asked me what I was doing with my life. I then explained to him that I was selling Bibles and health literature. I explained to him that I am a student and my wife was still in India. I did not ask him for money. He simply said that he will buy 1,000 Bibles. I was shocked. Each Bible cost about 477 rands at that time. It was a beautiful family Bible. He did not know how much it cost, and I did not want to take advantage of him. I asked him the reason he wanted so many Bibles, and he explained that every weekend at least 4 weddings took place at his hotel, and he wanted to gift the Bible to the newlyweds. I suggested that he order enough for the month and progress month to month. What Pedro did not know, that he was being used by God for a higher purpose that he knew nothing about. I also did not know that God had such a plan for me. On the last day when we were about to leave India, my brother-in-law called me and said that Pedro's hotel was on the news the previous night in flames, and he will not be able to order Bibles anymore. It was at that moment that I fell on my knees and thanked God for providing for my airfare and some other expenses through the sale of Bibles to Pedro. I prayed for Pedro and his family, and I knew that God will not abandon them. At the time when the higher purpose of that order had expired, our study was complete. God had used Pedro and all the other events leading up to that point to provide for us for 3 years in India. In a way, we were fully sponsored by God Himself. These series of events are miracles designed to meet a need at a particular time. In striving towards achievement and success, it is wise to have God on your side for you, and for you to be on His side. The miracles that I speak about are just few of the countless that God has blessed us with. I believe that God is very interested in our success. Many people try to leave God out of the equation of success, but I have discovered that in my struggles and challenges of life, if we depend on God, He will surprise us in many ways that we cannot even imagine. In my life, I have struggled through countless times, but through it all, I can truly say that God carried me through. I'd prefer to live hand to mouth as long as it is God's hand and my mouth. Since these experiences, I have tried not to be discouraged by circumstances and difficulties, because I know that God is actively working behind the scenes for my good. I do not share with you stories that I read or heard. I have tasted and I have seen that God is on our side. Turn around and you will see that God has never left your side. If I had not gone into that taxi without money, if I had not risked my life in Wheelbarrow, if I had not been interested in praying for the person I did not know, I would not have seen the hand of God working on my behalf. It is important to remember that God will not do for you what you are supposed to do for yourself. Prayer is important, but God wants us to act in faith as well. My dear friend, in your struggle for survival and in your search for hope in this world of hopelessness, I encourage you to look to the heavens. God is on your side, I believe. God is busy behind the scenes, unknown to you, working and orchestrating events in your favor. God wants you to succeed. He wants you to succeed in school. He wants you to succeed in your relationship, and He wants you to succeed in life as well. Trust Him, and you will see that your life too can be a series of miracles. God bless you.